Well, thank you, Professor Grisser, for that wonderful opening remarks and an introduction that I do not really deserve. In China, we have an idiom called 抛砖引玉. I'm sure all countrymen under this roof knows what it means. You throw out a few dirty old bricks, and hopefully some fine pieces of jewelry or jade will follow. So here are my bricks. On the surface, I'm not really involved in sports. I'm an anchorman. I'm a co-founder of CCTV9, the international TV channel of China, and I used to read news and produce news on CCTV2, the business channel. But I happened to be born to a father who was a novelist in the 1970s, who wrote this really famous book about a gymnast, a Horatio Alger story, a small boy from remote countryside who became a worldwide champion in gymnasium. In 1976, which was the best-selling book of the year, which was made into a major motion picture. But nobody talks about the book now because it was a book during the Cultural Revolution. And also, one of my co-founders of CCTV9 is now the head of CCTV5, CCTV's official sports channel, which is, of course, the most powerful sports media in China. And a while ago, I myself was invited to speak in a series of events, including the Davos annual meeting of the World Economic Forum on sports. But I'll start with a personal story that happened about 4 months ago. I was invited by a friend of mine, a financier based in New York by the name of Teddy Forsman. If you're MBA candidates, I'm sure you've heard of his name before, who is one of the leading characters of this book called Barbarians at the Gate, the founder, the grandfather of a business practice called the leveraged buyouts. He gave me a call and said, Chenggang, I bought another company, and it's called IMG, International Management Group. And it is allegedly the world's largest and most powerful sports marketing and management company. And he said, my reputation in the business world is that whenever I buy a company, I will sell it in 3 or 4 years at 10 times the purchase price. And he said, I wanted to come to Florida and give a talk to all of the IMG staff on what's going on with China. I said, why? And he said, because IMG has been in China for more than 28 years, yet IMG has failed to establish a business in China. IMG is also a case study. Have you ever found out IMG case study in either Harvard or Yale Business School textbooks? So I went to Florida. I spent 3 days with all the senior execs of the IMG and had a very interesting discussion with all of them. And somehow I found the reasons why, for more than a quarter of a century, IMG failed to establish a business in China. The reasons are not unique. First of all, what sports really means in China. What I believe is that sports is not an industry in China, not yet. And if you want to really talk about sports in China, you have to talk about Chinese history. And then we have to talk about a particular syndrome, mentality of Chinese people, and that I would interpret as the sick man of Asia syndrome. 东亚病夫情节. Ever since, if I take a look at myself, before I was 7 years old, I knew nothing about this syndrome. And then I watched a TV series called 霍元甲. Now a major motion picture has been made about this guy. And then I heard of this expression for the very first time, sick man of Asia. It's about China in the 18th or 19th century when the aggressive foreign powers basically split China. China was turned into a colony, and the Chinese people lived in shame and humiliation. And then this guy, this kung fu master, was fighting all the Japanese and European boxers to win glory and pride for Chinese people once again. This name was actually delegated to Chinese people by our Japanese friends, sick man of Asia. So I think ever since then, for more than 100 years, the Chinese people are working really hard on all fronts to prove that the Japanese and the world were wrong about this judgment, that Chinese people can stand tall among the world community, that Chinese are not sick men and women of Asia. Probably I would say, given China's today's status, we're way beyond that, but unfortunately, it is still maybe because of our education or the way our books and novels and movies were made, we were still more or less influenced by this mentality. So ever since 1949, sports has always been used as a vehicle, either for diplomacy, as we know, I'm sure all of you have heard about ping pong diplomacy, and the vehicle for Chinese people to win back the pride that we once owned. So that's the reason why it is 100% regulated by the state and not really an industry. So for IMG, a world-renowned sports management company, to come to China as early as in the 1970s, it is difficult for them to make money. And secondly, the most important component of any sports industry is the athletes. And in China, the athletes are widely seen as property and assets of the state. And rightly so, because just as the character of my father's book, usually what our athletes are, they are usually very poor boys and girls, born and raised in small, remote countryside, who had no other options. So their parents had to send them to state-run sports schools to get a proper education and get fed and dressed. That's usually how the story started. And of course, while growing up, their entire tuition education fee were subsidized, paid for by the government, from the municipal level to the provincial level, and if you're really good, by the state level. And of course, if that's the case, then you're basically owned by the government. They pay for everything. You need to pay back. And of course, these athletes were they were educated in the way that they should go out and win back national pride for the country. That's why the Chinese people love them. So in this case, these athletes are not really active participants of this industry. I'm sure you have all heard of this story of this really famous Chinese